Hello, everyone. Welcome to another installment of Open Air presented by the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm Dexter Wimberly, and we have an incredible guest today, as usual. Tunji Adeniyi-Jones' paintings emerge from a perspective of what the artist describes as cultural addition, combination, and collaboration. Born and educated in the UK, and now living and working in the United States, his practice is inspired by the ancient history of West Africa and its attendant mythology and by his Yoruba heritage. Tunji was born in London in 1992 and lives and works in Brooklyn. In 2014, he received his bachelor's in fine arts from the Ruskin School of Art, Oxford University in the UK. And in 2017, he was awarded an MFA in painting and printmaking from Yale School of Art in Connecticut. Tunji's work is included in Becoming the Sea, currently on view at the Harvey B. Gantt Center through January 2025. Becoming the Sea includes 12 artists who participated in the first 2 years of the Black Rock Senegal residency. Tunji also recently presented a new site-specific installation titled Celestial Gathering as part of Nigeria's Imaginary for the Nigeria Pavilion at the 60th Venice Biennale in 2024. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Tunji to today's conversation. How are you?
Hey, Dexter, thank you so much. I am doing well, and I'm very happy to be speaking with you. And to the audience, thank you for joining us this evening.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So much has happened in your career in the past decade. I mean, obviously, you've been making art for quite a long time, but I feel like the past 10 years have just been really outstanding in terms of your visibility, the momentum. I don't think like a month goes by where I don't hear your name, someone talking about something you're working on somewhere, some show,
hmm
something.
hmm hmm
So just like as a quick check-in with you, um, what's happening right now? Like, what's the most exciting thing going on for you right now? Like, what are you preparing for?
So, yeah, thank you for that. Right now, I'm still, I would say, processing the aftermath of the Nigeria Pavilion in Venice this year still. I think that moment was hugely significant for me, is still hugely significant for me. Um, as you said, yeah, the past decade has been really thrilling. You know, I've just been working nonstop and things have been happening. But this one at Venice certainly gave me kind of reason to pause just a little bit and reflect. Of course, I don't think I would have forecast it for myself at this stage in my career so soon, but I certainly felt like it gave me an opportunity to be quite, I guess I would say, brave with what I felt like doing. You know, the pavilion had 8 artists in total, and so I felt like it was quite liberating to be in a group show setting and that kind of very intensive environment in terms of like perhaps the history and the expectation of the Venice Biennale. And Nigeria had only done a pavilion once before in 2012, I believe. So it was quite significant for our country. And people turned out. My family came, my close friends came, and it was a really significant moment. You know, it felt a bit like the Olympics or something like that, like the Art Olympics, as people like to say. Um, but yeah, I'm still processing and digesting what's been a really fantastic year with Venice. And in terms of what's coming next, I think I would certainly like to step forward into more collaborative kind of group exhibition spaces like that, where I see my work in dialogue with other artists, be they Nigerian, American, British, from anywhere really.
Fantastic. So I have lots of questions for you, but I'm going to take a sort of a different approach to our conversation today than usual, and
Okay.
that is kind of do things a little bit in reverse from where I would normally do them. So speaking of the Venice Biennale, I mean, most people who even consider themselves to be art lovers or art fanatics, as one
Hmm.
might say,
Hmm.
have still never gone, haven't had an opportunity to go. Can you talk a
Yes.
little bit about the process of preparing yourself for such a big presentation? Just in terms of how does an artist get invited to participate in the Venice Biennale? Is it do you get a random email? Does your phone ring?
You do. Yeah,
Is
you
there
get
a
a
bat
random email.
signal?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You get that random email, but it was from a curator and good friend, good contact, Andrea Emilife. We have been in touch for some years preceding. She has been strong and fast at work at trying to kind of connect the bridge through the Nigerian diaspora as it manifests here in the States, as it is in the UK and Europe, and trying to kind of connect as many of us who are operating in other parts of the world to kind of home and to what's happening in Nigeria at present. So I was actually at the time in Nigeria when I got that email. I was doing a residency at the Yinka Shonibari Gas Foundation. So it was really nice timing. And then from there, it was just a series of collaborative efforts to try and put together a team that could make something that was really ambitious. I think when you get this kind of opportunity, right, you feel like, yeah, I have to kind of try something, try something new. I think we were given an opportunity to see the space ahead of time, so the work I made was very site specific to the room in the Palazzo that the Nigerian Pavilion took place in. And yeah, I spent all of 2023 and the first sort of few months of 2024 working on it. Um, I had a small team with me, and it was really comprehensive but really exciting. Yeah, a really really thrilling experience.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I remember I had a opportunity to visit your studio. It's funny, time is so elastic now. I'm thinking that was
Yes,
earlier this year. It
I,
could have very easily been last year, but nevertheless,
Dex, I feel like it was last year. Was it this year?
yeah,
I d
it was probably this year. You were
Did
on
you
the
see
you
the
were
Venice
definitely in
piece?
the I saw you working on the Venice piece, so I'm
Yeah,
thinking
this
that
year.
that was
Yeah,
this year.
yeah,
I only
yeah.
point that out to say everything is just moving so quickly, and it's amazing how you hear about the upcoming Venice Biennale, and before you know it, it's kind of come, and it's like now it's the prior.
Hmm.
You mentioned
Hmm.
Yinka Shikari, and
Yes,
participating in his residency. So he's an artist that I've always admired. I obviously I'm not alone in that. He's a titan of creativity. Um,
yes,
what's your relationship with Yinka, and how did that evolve? And I'm just curious about that because I've met him once, but it was in a group setting, so I don't purport to know him well. I've just kind of I know
yes.
his work, I know him as a person, but how did you make that connection? And I bring that up because obviously he's from a slightly older generation, right?
hmm
And so I'm always interested in the relationship between artists from different generations and how those relationships evolve and how you know
hmm
and how they're mutually beneficial.
So I'm glad you brought up Yinka in this capacity because honestly, as a Nigerian British artist, growing up in London and sort of seeking to pursue a career as an artist, Yinka was like my only, or let me not say only, but he was one of my few inspirations, sort of like motivations, influences. He's undoubtedly one of the reasons why I'm an artist today, like why I felt sort of brave enough to pursue this, why I felt sort of how I felt represented in the art world. In my studies in the UK, I didn't have, at the time, I did not have too many significant Black British influences to look up to. Now, of course, things have shifted for the better. You know a lot more about the Denzel Foresters, the Frank Bowlings, the Lubina Hamids, like who've always been there, but they were not in the kind of critical curatorial or like educational artist space in the UK. Between let's say 2006 and 2012. So that was a really pivotal moment. Yinka Shonibari was one of the only artists I had to kind of latch onto to learn from. It's funny, a lot of the early work I was making when I was in London was just sort of like for like imitation of some of Yinka's work. I mean, that's what young artists do, but I was really looking at his work to kind of guide me in on my path of what my career would be. So this opportunity, he was also in the Nigeria Pavilion too, but the residency was really just kind of, and I'm supporting residency now too on the back of it because it's something that I really believe in. I owe a lot to, and I'm sure several kind of young Black British artists owe a lot to Yinka because he, yeah, he's been he's been so pivotal in kind of, the development of British art, full stop, but specifically for those who look like us and who come from Nigeria, who come from anywhere, and are also, something British, Ghanaian British, Ugandan British, Nigerian British. He was everything at that point. So it was an immense honor to go and do residency at his wonderful property in Nigeria, Lagos.
That's great. There's so many things that what you said sort of like are triggering my mind. Like one is um, I've managed to visit London several times in the past couple of years, and I'm still unpacking all of those experiences, sort of
hmm
working with galleries, meeting artists, sort of understanding that the scene there is very different than the scene that I kind of came up in New York. It's just, it has some similarities, but also has some strong, distinct differences. I'd love to talk a
hmm
little bit about London, like
hmm
what you consider the art scene to be like in London right now, your own personal experiences. And you visit often, I imagine,
Yes.
families there.
Yes.
You mentioned several artists that sort of become more prominent, others that are established in the sort of pantheon, like Frank Bowling, who
Yes.
is
Yes.
another artist I've considered to be incredibly influential to me, even as a curator. He's one of my. I mean, I have a stack of Frank Bowling books right here on my desk, like seven
hmm
books.
hmm
um,
hmm
but yeah, let's talk a little bit about London, being an artist there, and what you kind of think the vibe is there right now.
So right now, I think it is flourishing and thriving in the capacity in which we're speaking about. I think curators such as Echo Eshin are doing a sensational job of really putting like Black diasporic kind of Black global art at the very forefront of what we're sort of able to see in London. He had a fantastic show at the National Portrait Gallery. He curated an excellent show at the Hayward. And I think if we go back to, there was basically when I was an art student, like if I'd have seen these kinds of shows, I probably would have stayed in London, for example. So the dynamic now, I think, is one that would inspire lots of young Black artists to go further and inspire certain artists to stick around. So basically, I was studying one of my tutors, the incredible painter Lynette Yadambrache. She could tell that I was feeling quite stifled and frustrated, so she advised that I move over to the States to pursue postgraduate study at Yale, where there was a vastly more diverse student body and faculty. And this may sound strange, but coming from the UK, it's like you get to a university in America and suddenly you can do AFAM studies, right? And I was coming from like the UK where there wasn't such a course. So I was kind of blown away by just that level of exposure to specifically cultural heritages that I could relate to. And that's what I was feeling starved of before I left. So now I think that London in present day, 2024 onwards, is thoroughly addressing all of these things. And I think young artists from other backgrounds, be that black or otherwise, certainly have more of a foothold to kind of latch onto, to stay in the city, to pursue, and then to connect with artists that have been there doing it the whole time, like Frank Bowling, like Lubina Hamid and the rest of the UK. These artists I wasn't studying in school, I wasn't taught in school or told about in school. And I think that would have made a big difference. So I know right now it's making a significant difference. I know right now, were I a 20, 21-year old art student, I would feel much better about my prospects, not just for a career, but to feel kind of connected and to feel like I have a place within the cultural art history. Because obviously, British art is so strong and so prominent, right? And so pronounced. It's just that the representation and diversity of it was very singular at that time. And so now you're seeing a slightly more diverse display, which is good. You know, like you say, I go back often, my mother's there, and I'm seeing just the best shows all the time. You know, I'm seeing shows that I'm like, wow, if I'd have seen this 10, 12, 15 years ago, it would have had a profound impact on me and my life. So I just know that there are young students in the UK whose lives are being changed for the better for seeing some of these curatorial endeavors, seeing some of these exhibitions. You know, that makes me happy for sure.
It's interesting to see that shift, and it sort of, in some ways, parallels my own experience, just in terms of thinking about time. I mean, when I became an independent curator, it was at a time where there were only a couple of other, sort of Black independent curators that were doing the kind of work that I really was, admiring and sort of chasing. There certainly
Hmm.
been Black curators forever. I'm just saying that at that time, 18 years ago or so, it was not the way it is now. And in fact,
Yes. Yeah.
similar to what you said, if I was just getting started now, it'd be an entirely different like
Hmm.
playing field, an entirely different way
Hmm.
of thinking about how to build a career and how to enter the art
Hmm.
world. In
Hmm.
fact, just using, categorically using the word Black for like Black artists. And of course, by saying that, I'm sort of like obviously generalizing because I'm saying Black, I'm talking about artists from the continent, artists from the
Hmm.
Caribbean, Black
Hmm.
American artists, artists from, Black artists in Europe. So for Black
Hmm.
artists today,
Hmm.
the playing field is so different than it was 20
Hmm.
years ago. If you were just getting
Hmm.
out of an MFA program 20 years ago, the
Hmm.
opportunities that were available then versus what's available now is so incredibly different. How have
Hmm.
you, have you balanced that, like managed your career? And I mean, some of this you may not even be able to answer, certainly not in this context, but I'm just kind of curious. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of opportunities that come your way.
Hmm.
You have to pick and choose. You're sort of
Hmm.
balancing both the commercial side of your career and the
Hmm.
institutional side. For
Hmm.
any artists that are listening to today or in the future who are trying to
Hmm.
figure out how to make those kinds of decisions, how to prioritize certain aspects of your career. And again, it may not be an
Hmm.
easy question to answer, but I just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think I am. So you can't see it because the camera's facing away from it, but I have a stack of books behind my screen. I've really, really been indulging in just reading about artists, their lives, from everywhere and anywhere. So British artists, I was reading a Lucian Freud biography, a Francis Bacon biography, kind of. There was a Warhol one. I think that I've really benefited from just honing in and studying just the lives of artists over the past 50, 60, 70 years. I think that, things are cyclical. Like we're seeing things for the first time now that will, irrevocably change like the future. But at the same time, certain things are cyclical. And I think that there is so much to be learned from studying the lives of those who've come before us, looking at like Frank Bowling's history of spending time in the UK and then also spending time in New York specifically and following a path that I can quite literally also say I'm doing something similar to that is incredibly informative. I think it helps you as a young artist, stay the course and kind of find your feet a bit, because it's such a sort of unsteady and stress inducing and kind of tumultuous process. And I imagine that's how it will always be, but it's really nice and reassuring and comforting to just study the others who've been there before us. I think there's so much to be gained from tutelage, mentorship, sort of like that kind of exchange intellectually. Um, I think that's been the most important thing for me, the most significant thing for me. It's like, okay, I'm this Nigerian British artist who's now been living in America for almost a decade. There are so many specificities to that I could perhaps feel a bit isolated, when of course in reality it's not actually that remarkable. With a bit of reading and a bit of background research, you start to see that, okay, no, there are several artists, maybe their background was coming from Brazil, South America, maybe their background was coming from somewhere else, following a similar diasporic, like cross-cultural hybridity sort of space within their work and exploring various things. Maybe for certain reasons you hadn't seen their work in a museum, so you didn't know about them. But with research, you can kind of like find your, don't know what word I would use, but your guiding stars or something like that. You know, it's like you wanna feel like as you're forging in the kind of choppy seas that you have like a direction to go in. And there's absolutely no shame in sort of like being connected to sort of lineage or history or legacy of artists who've done similar things. I think, yeah, it's hard right now with like the way that being an artist is so successful now, more so than ever. It's sort of like every 5 to 10 years, it becomes like more of an understood and valued career, which is good, right? But I think at the same time, that can sometimes veer away from what it really means to be an artist, which is to be connected to others, to be part of like a broader community. It's not so singular and isolated. Sometimes it can feel isolating, particularly as a young artist today. So I think opening things up and remembering that it's not, you don't have to do everything on your own. You're not expected to do everything on your own. It's good to be in conversation with other artists and to be connected to other artists. It's good to kind of look at people. I'm in New York, so I look at someone like Rashid Johnson, and I'm just like, okay, you know, there are people who are really connected to. He's invested in the artists who've come before him, those artists that are after him too, and things like that. You know, staying connected as much as possible to other practitioners, I think, has been the main takeaway for me, the main thing that I've learned.
I love that. I love that. And I particularly love your reference to reading and studying artists that have come
Hmm.
before you and understanding that the journey of being an artist, while it may be specific to each individual, their life, the twists and turns of any individual's life is going to be like their own fingerprint. However, in the broader sense, every artist, you know, does encounter this some of the same challenges, the same
Yes.
struggles, uh, whether they are financial, psychological, familial. There are all
Yes.
sorts of things that are,
Yes.
there's not, there's like nothing new. And I think one of the
Hmm.
things that happens with younger people, and in this context, I mean people in their early 20s,
Hmm.
and I remember that time, that way of thinking. I think that's kind of like one of the reasons why I sort of operate the way that I do. It's like I can sort of switch on my 22-year-old brain when I need to,
Hmm.
for better or worse. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
nevertheless, but nevertheless, that 20 something thinking often is the feeling that you're the only one dealing with this. You're the only
Yeah.
one facing this challenge. No one's
Yeah.
ever had it so hard. Like
Yeah.
that whole sort of like,
Yeah.
why, almost like, and not a victim mentality. That's not what I'm
No.
saying. I'm just saying that there's a
No.
sense
Yeah.
sometimes when you're inexperienced or you don't have the historical context to believe
Hmm.
that you're the only one or the first one sort of dealing with something. And when you pull
Hmm.
the lens back a bit and you
Mm.
realize that some of the most well-known and impactful artists of the last century have gone through
Mm.
the exact same challenges.
Hmm.
And then you
Hmm.
start to realize, well, this is actually part of being an artist in some ways.
Yes.
You,
Yeah.
you've made a decision to go down a path that is just laced with unpredictability. Right? So
Yes.
and when you accept that, then the things that happen become a little bit easier to manage. Well, enough of my therapy session. I now want to switch gears a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And talk about you, and let's talk about your work. I know that we have
Yes.
some images. I'm anxious to get
Hmm.
to them, and we'll get the first one up because I'm curious to hear how you sort of no artist starts where they are, right? So you have to start
Hmm.
somewhere. Like, and I'm kind of
Hmm.
curious to understand the journey of getting to this way of painting and what are your
Hmm.
major influence and what your major influences are. So you can share a bit about that, and we can talk about the works that are on the screen in sequence.
Hmm. Yeah, I think this work uh, is very specific to me moving to America. I think I wasn't painting before I came out here to pursue my MFA at Yale, and so I went there with an open mind and, frankly, no sense of a style. So I just kind of radically kind of learned off my classmates more than anyone, and through studio visits and through research. And over those 2 years, this kind of just developed, this Red Twins piece specifically. I think someone had introduced me to Bob Thompson's work. I'd never seen it before, and I was really taken by the idea of there just being these bright red, orange, luminous bodies, just like I hadn't really considered figurative painting in such a way. So that kind of gave me the impetus to just work with these bodies in this flat color plane. In terms of the composition, I was also really looking at abstract painting, particularly like the New York school, like the Frank Stellas, the people like that, the Lee Krasners. Like, I really found their work to be more figurative than abstract, if I'm being honest. Like, if I look at someone like Lee Krasner's work, I see it as very figurative. And so I was trying to bring those two things together. I was digesting everything that was around me. I was taking trips down to New York to go to MoMA and look at paintings. And I ended up with this formula. So the bodies are, they're African inspired, they're black bodies. But I think that what happened gradually is I just wanted to make it a bit more elastic and versatile. I wasn't really as interested in showing you features like, hair and things like this. I kind of wanted to focus more on the movement, shape of the body, the silhouette, which also came from me looking at Aaron Douglas, which when we go forward to some of the other works, we'll see some more kind of clear references to that, for example. And before I moved to America, I had just never seen these artists on. I didn't know about them. I didn't know about Aaron Douglas. I didn't know about Bob Thompson. So these early works are an absolute just direct response to that, really. I kind of was so inspired, am still so inspired by these American artists who have kind of like forged a way through figuration or otherwise through narrative painting and through just everything. So yeah, I was learning when I got here. I didn't really have a style, and I just kind of like stuck my head down and worked like crazy for 2 years, and this is what came of it.
Oh, that's amazing. Let's advance to the next image, and let's talk a bit about like your relationship to color, and what is your
Hmm.
thought process around the colors that you select for your work?
So really, as I mentioned with the New York school, the abstract painters, I really find large blocks of color, like monochromes, I find them to be kind of the most affecting on me personally. Um, I find that they communicate the most to me, like a wall of color that is to scale, at least, 6 by 5 feet or something like that, just feels like something you can get lost and immersed in. So that's kind of where the dimension and scale of the work came from. And then I just knew that I wanted to be able to speak through color quite specifically. I think some of these, like this work that was in the exhibition you created this year, I think you can kind of more see the Aaron Douglas references in this one. But
Sure.
yeah, I was thinking about dealing with the black body in a way through color that wasn't so much just like for like sort of like black skin tone, but using like deep blues and violets to show a dimensionality to it. I then, of course, was thinking about Kerry James too, who I didn't know about before I came to America. I didn't know about Kerry James Marshall either.
Really, really,
No, no, no.
really.
This is what I'm talking about, man. Like these artists were not. They are now, thanks to the curators. Like we're talking about Echo Etch and people like this. But back then, 2010, in an art school in the UK, we were not talking about painting. We were not talking about Kerry James.
Wow, wow.
we had, as I said, Lynette Adeniyi-Jones, she was there, but she on her own, couldn't determine the kind of pedagogy of the school. So it just kind of blew my mind, honestly, when I moved out here. And so this is a pretty direct response to that, to me kind of understanding this really comprehensive and expressive history of sort of figure painting, centered on the black body, inspired by everything from African art to European modernism, the kind of hybridity of all of that, which was something I could speak to too, being Nigerian British, right? So I suddenly felt like I had an entry point and I had a voice within it to use my background within that space too. Um, yeah,
So in terms of the composition of the figures in your work, is that something that you is it intuitive? Is it planned? I'm assuming you're not working from models.
no, yeah, no, I'm not.
um,
I'm not working from because the proportions are slightly impossible. The neck and the shoulders and the joints all kind of bend in impossible ways.
yes.
Um, I would say that I was interested in creating like figures that had the most kind of dynamism and kind of tension within the space. I found that moving to America, moving here, sort of understanding what my place was in culture here, learning sort of like the history, and then feeling, frankly, a charge on my body in space at all times that was unlike that of anywhere else. There are unique charges to these places. When you're in West Africa, when you're in Nigeria, it's a different charge. When you're in London, when you're in Europe, it's a different charge. And in America, I felt a particular kind of charge, so I wanted to respond to that with the work. I kind of wanted the figures in my paintings to be really, really striking. And so the way to do that compositionally is just try and create as much tension as possible, kind of getting limbs to touch like the very edges of the frame, creating as much kind of force within a shallow space as possible. Um, yeah, I was trying to, and still I'm trying to translate that feeling of,
Mm.
um, it's like a combination of uh, exuberance, attrition, like affection, like everything, just the myriad of things that we as black bodies deal with just on a day-to-day basis in this country, right? I think that's people think about representing that in different ways, but when using the body, I kind of wanted it to be pretty striking. um yeah,
Let's advance to the next image. And we talked about your education a bit in the UK and also in the US. And I know that oftentimes people are told that there's certain rules around painting or rules
yes,
around creating images.
yes,
And I'm curious to hear,
yes.
are there any rules that you decided to break in making your work that you found to be successful for you? Things that you were told not to do that you decided to do anyway.
Yeah,
You,
that's
and I just love to hear about that.
such a good question. There are absolutely rules. There are absolutely rules. I think the best thing, and one of the best things about the painting MFA up at Yale, was that the program is acutely aware of kind of shattering those rules individually for who may or may not have them. But the program was not interested in reinforcing those. It really encouraged the breaking down of certain rules. So in my case, coming from the way I was studying painting, you absolutely were not supposed to just like paint a figure monochromatically in the way that I'm doing here. Like one color to describe a whole body. It's like, no, it's too flattening. It's like, what is it? Is it a poster? Is it that was absolutely a rule that I broke quite happily. And that's why the first one we looked at, the red one, was such a breakthrough moment for me, because I just didn't realize that you could do that, that you could describe a whole body with one color. And I obviously went through a few iterations, but yeah, once I decided that it's what I wanted to do, it just was like so invigorating, and it was so new because that was a rule. Yeah, that nobody can just have like a full color. You have to define each kind of corner and each kind of feature with very, very specific kind of painting. So that was my rule. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And it's funny you should say that because if it makes me think. Well, I certainly have in the past. You think back to painting of the past century, well, the
Hmm
20th century. You think about people
hmm
like Matisse, for example, and if
hmm
I'm certain that there were paintings
hmm
where there was one color used for an entire white body.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think what I'm speaking to is also the very specific like British portrait or just like figure painting history that is in its own way so caught up in this history of like sophistication and kind of like articulation. But you know, I grew up idolizing the work of artists like Freud and Bacon and Jenny
Sure.
Savile, and so like their figures obviously are like painted so dynamically with so many different colors on like flat planes. So I think that I kind of grew up understanding that that was really the only way to describe bodies or something, right? But, you know, then later I come to find out about people like Lubina Hamid. You come to find out about some of these artists who were at the time articulating black bodies in much more kind of like dynamic and flat forms, working with silhouettes and things like this. I just didn't have access to it. But so when I moved here, it was really revolutionary. But typically, that just isn't the thing that's done with British English art or something, with figure painting. Yeah.
Let's advance to the next image in the interest of time, and also I'm sure it'll be,
Yes.
different from the prior, which seemed like an install shot from the prior image. Can you tell us about what we're seeing here,
Yeah.
and
So I think
what exhibition this was?
this was an exhibition at Nickel Bouchine Gallery in the Lower East Side in 2019. So we can look at this and then actually we can quickly transition onto a few more because I just wanted to show how before the Venice installation, I was starting to slowly think about sort of the paintings bleeding out into each other. So it's no longer
Mm,
just like an individual form, like I'm thinking about a long frieze, a long presentation, not quite mural yet, but just thinking about the image carrying on across the paint, the canvas paint, so that you can get a broader sense of the world that I'm trying to create. I guess, yeah, world building, like the very beginning of me starting to think about how to create an image that stretches beyond just the dimensions of the individual painting. Because, you know, I didn't have that much space in my studio at the time. Like this was the max dimension I could kind of work with on a large scale. So I was like, let me just repeat it. Let me think about how I can extend it beyond. And so when we get to look at the Venice piece later, this was kind of me starting to think about how to spread across a room and spread across space with my images.
yeah, yeah. And speaking of world building and that sort of aspect of your work, we can advance to the next image. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship to nature? People
Mm,
often talk
mm,
about the figures in your work, but they don't often talk about the nature that presents
mm,
itself, the
mm.
foliage, the flora that's in the work. What brought you to incorporating that into your paintings?
So it felt like I'm a draftsman at heart. Like I really love drawing. It felt like the foliage, the leaves were a really exciting opportunity to show my hand in the work as much as possible so that I could render and articulate each leaf or each kind of floral aspect. And it also felt like the figure is what dominates the canvas and the composition, but it felt like the flora could then become the secondary kind of protagonist in the space so that the figures are moving through something and they're interacting with something, they're interacting with the space. It kind of became like a vehicle for color, but also a secondary participant in what was happening in the canvas, to create like a sense of movement and to add to that sense of dynamism. Now, I will say that this has become apparent to me recently. You know, these paintings, it's floral and it's leaves, but I don't spend a lot of time in nature, right? I'm not a nature guy. I'm not a nature boy. So it's interesting. I'm a city dweller, like truly born and raised in a city. I spend most of my time in a city. If I'm traveling somewhere, if I'm in Nigeria, I'm in Lagos, I'm in the city. I respond most strongly to these kind of metropoles globally, anywhere. And I think that I've understood through the reading and through the research, come to understand that there's like an expansive history of kind of like artists within the diaspora working through their crafts through global metropole city spaces, be them writers or musicians, etc. And so I guess all that is to say that these paintings are and have always been about what it means to be in like a bustling city space. Now, we're looking at bodies and flora, but it's like it's speaking to a feeling that comes from like an urban landscape much more than like the sort of a rural one. I really it became apparent to me recently where I was just like I don't spend a lot of time around kind of like these environments. I'm in cities, like that's where I feel really comfortable. I feel, everyone's on top of everyone and there's that tension. The way that for some reason I'm choosing to express that and depict that is through this kind of like floral and this kind of jungle space. So it's like there's something that happens there. There's a translation, but on the back end or the front end rather, it's about me walking around in cities. I'm a pedestrian. I love walking everywhere. I walk for an hour or two a day if I can. So I'm on the streets, I'm on the pavement, or the sidewalk, and then I go into my studio and I make this work. So it's kind of like it wouldn't feel right for me to just be painting cityscapes or something like of more like an
Right.
urban paint field, but this is a response to that, whether I'm somewhere else. I spent some time in Mexico City and I had an exhibition there a few years ago, and that was a nice moment to kind of see the intersection of what I'm describing, because Mexico City is of course like so natural. There are trees everywhere. There's like this real integration of both the sort of concrete and then the natural. And Lagos is of course like that too, like a lot of West Africa is like that. But that was where things started to come into place for me a bit more, where I was like, okay, I can kind of see what I'm trying to tap into here. There's a lot of tension within that, but the kind of balance between, yeah, this endless floral, powerful kind of like floral, but then also kind of like dense, dense kind of populace, like a dense population kind of space. I can't see myself living like in the middle of nowhere in a studio far away for a while, right? So I think that the paintings will undoubtedly look different at that point, but for now, these are about kind of like dense city spaces.
Well, I quite like that. I mean, I think that that sort of antithesis of your upbringing
Hmm.
and how you've sort of
Hmm.
distilled that into a different way of seeing,
Hmm.
seeing a way of art, of making art. I also
Hmm.
grew up in a city. I grew up in Brooklyn, so I
Hmm.
mean, it's funny how different you feel when you're standing on, the actual ground versus standing on the sidewalk. When you go
Hmm.
to the countryside and
Hmm.
you're actually standing on earth versus
Hmm.
standing
Hmm.
on concrete, has a
Hmm.
completely different energy to it.
Hmm.
But I don't want to digress too much on that. But I will say, what I quite love about your use of foliage in your paintings is how that allows you to play with light in such a dynamic way. It
Hmm.
creates this sort of sense of not knowing whether it's day or it's nighttime, and
Hmm.
I think that makes it elevates your work into this realm of magic. It's like a magical realm that these paintings
Hmm.
exist in.
Hmm.
Um and 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 one other thing that really, I think is fantastic, is that I can see your work from across a stadium and know that it's your work. Like, there's some, you
Hmm.
have this vocabulary of color
Hmm.
and shape that is so, so you and so yours, that I think you really have captured something that I'm excited to see where you go with this in the next decade or
Hmm.
two as well.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
I know, as I mentioned, no artist, is, has where you are today is not where you were 10 years ago, and it's not where you're going
Nope.
to be 10, 20 years from now. And I'm excited to see what that journey is, and sort of like what you're thinking about too, because I'm sure, I'm
Mm.
sure you're thinking about, you're thinking about abstraction. You're probably thinking
Mhm.
about other
Mhm.
media that you want to work in, whether it's film or it's
Mhm.
sculpture or
Mhm.
light and sound. Who knows? That's always
Mm.
very exciting to me, because I feel like
Mhm.
as much as you've had a really incredible past decade,
Mhm.
it also feels very much like you're at the beginning of your career. Like,
I'm at
so
the
in
start.
a strange way.
Yeah. I'm at the start. I'm operating probably at around like 20%, let's say.
Right,
Like I
right.
feel like I'm operating about 20% of like all the vision and what I'm describing to you. I have a lot of walls built up about maybe perhaps like we were talking about earlier, the rules and stuff like this. Maybe I think there's a lot of unwinding for me to do, and I think that that's gonna help shine a light on this particular body of work, this particular moment we're looking at more. I'm absolutely kind of so excited to push forward into like the coming decades. I think that's the biggest privilege about getting to do this, about getting to be an artist is, it's not like athletes or something like we get better with time, like time is on our side. Like it's like musicians and writers, it's the same. It's like you life really informs the work. So I'm really excited for what life is going to bring, and I'm excited for how the work will develop. I think one of my favorite artists here in New York as well, Alex Katz. The dude is like 97 or something, man. He's like
Right,
painting like
right.
he's a young man. Like his work is so vibrant, and like the way he speaks about it, it's just like the dude is like he's just in it. He's like in his zone. Has just been in his zone, and that's kind of the most exciting thing because you can tell it's just been through the decades and the decades and the decades of just been like, yeah, I believe in what I'm doing, and I'm going to keep going at it. So that's
Yes,
certainly how I feel like with
it's
life.
quite
Yeah,
yeah, it's quite something. I mean, so given your age, I mean, you could have another 50 or 60 years ahead of you in making
yeah,
work, which is an incredible thing to think about.
it is. Yeah, fingers crossed. By the grace. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's what we want.
Let's advance to the next image. I think we may be down to the final three.
Yeah, we can go. We should probably go to the next to the Venice. I think that's coming up next. Yeah, yeah.
Sure, sure. So yeah, let's talk about your decision making in this work. What
hmm
led you to wanting the place to work on the ceiling? What were your considerations? Was this the first time you did this?
Yes, first time. This room, I wanted to respond to the kind of like highly decorative ornamental designs and fixtures that you can see above the doorways. These were things that were kind of beginning to emerge in my work anyway, as like further elements of a way to develop the flora, make it more specific, to start looking at kind of this really, really dynamic history of ornamentation, which also was Venetian and sometimes like classically Italian. But I felt like, if I was going to go to Venice, I couldn't just put my paintings on the wall. I needed to try something. I felt like this was a perfect opportunity to try something, to really, really push what I had been doing. And as I had spoken about before with those lines of works, I just felt like, it was time to just consider something that could cover a whole surface, that could cover a whole wall or cover a ceiling in this instance. And it was just, yeah, it's been a fantastic thing to see the work above it, to get to move through it in such a different way and to put the work on a different kind of axis. Now, one thing that had developed was that I started discovering that the work didn't necessarily have a right way up, which is again another rule, right? This is another rule that was broken. It's like you can flip it upside down and it would still look really interesting if you would turn my paintings upside down, which yeah, is not something that was typical. So unless we're talking about an abstract painting, right? But in figurative painting, it's not typical that turning it
Right.
upside down or turning it on its side will also reveal like um, a compelling composition. So it felt like I didn't have to change what was happening in the work. I just needed to find a way to put it on the ceiling, and then it would kind of automatically bring something new out of the way you could experience it. Um, yeah, it was really thrilling, man.
And I saw a video on White Cube's website with
hmm
with this work, and it really was astounding how the colors from the painting sort of changed the color of the room, and that
mm.
interplay of light was really was really special to see. Um, Speaking of rules, some of the colors that you use in your work are not common, right?
hmm
Like these are not colors
hmm
that I often see. Um,
hmm
just out and about, looking at artists, looking at shows. Is that a conscious
hmm
decision, sort of move away from an expected palette to just do something that is sort of dramatic and drastic and different?
It's certainly. I do like the drama. Yeah, I do like the idea of the dramatic and the drastic. I when I speak to my cousins about it, they tell me that that is like probably the most uniquely like Yoruba and Nigerian aspect of my personality and character. This is like a
Mm,
very that's a
mm.
very Nigerian characteristic, a very Yoruba characteristic. Bold, bright colors. I won't like take I won't let us take the whole responsibility of it, like all across West Africa too, Ghana, Senegal, all these places. It's bold, striking color is the language, and you kind of just stack it. Like if you look at even some of the Ghanaian like kente designs, it's like you stack bold color on top of bold color. You trigger like bright blues with bright yellows with bright greens, which again is probably like taking color theory in its most conservative sense as it would be employed in Europe and just completely supercharging it and kind of like not setting any limitation. Like, why would you? There's kind of a sense of decadence to the work. Like, I definitely feel decadent when I'm doing this stuff, right? I think I use color very decadently because I feel, um, firstly, like, why not? And if I'm able to, then there's no reason I should sort of stop myself from doing it. But I think it's a very uniquely Nigerian characteristic of how I make my work and where my work comes from, kind of like the source I pull from. Um, I think this installation was special because Yinka Shonibari had an installation next door. His work was kind of reimagining the kind of terracotta figures, the masks, the heads, the sculptures. So his work had this kind of orange, earthy tone to it too. And I felt that that was great because it could kind of create this connection to what I'm thinking about when I'm using like this kind of earthy orange or this bright red orange. I'm also thinking about like the color of the soil and like the history of those objects and those sculptures that were kind of made from the ground and then like put in the ground and yeah, the color becomes a vehicle for all of these kind of references and things like that. So um, yeah, it's kind of the West African sensibility, absolutely, to be like really really bold with the color.
I love that idea of supercharging the colors. That's great. I don't think
Hmm.
I've heard anyone say
Hmm.
that recently. It's really, really
Hmm.
great. Um, are, are there one or two aspects of your Yoruba heritage that come through in the work that you could speak to? Because I'd imagine that a lot of people who are watching this interview or will watch it in the future, they may not know much about that heritage, right? That aspect of your life, and so is there a figure? Is there a motif? Is there some object that appears in your work that's connected to that aspect of your
Yes.
heritage?
Yeah, if we can go forward to maybe two more, so not the next one, the
Sure,
final slide.
sure,
Yeah, perfect. So the body markings are directly related to the traditional scarifications that were from the sort of royal characters and um, cast members of the Benin Kingdom. Now, all that we have from this moment are these heads and these kind of busts. Like these are the things that the Benin bronzes you hear about repatriation, and that's something that the whole of the continent is trying to work on, and the European institutions are being a bit stiff with it. But what we have are these heads, and the heads are characterized by these really, really graphic lines, these scarification lines that come down and they kind of cross all across the face and the neck. Now, when I look at that formally, I just immediately think that's a beautiful thing to draw. Like there's a lot of room for expression within that. But also, I
sure.
felt like I felt like there wasn't a lot of like a full body representation of this in the history. So I just wanted to extend that and use the kind of scarification all across the body, use them as like a guiding way to articulate and define these characters too. So what you'll see that is very specific is, yeah, the characters with the lines on their body are very specific to Yoruba history, to the Benin bronzes and that ancient kingdom. That's me trying to kind of bring a bit of that specificity into the painting history. um, when I first started out, I was kind of exclusively working within that range, I think. But as the years have gone on and I've been able to travel a bit further across the West African coast and spend some meaningful time in Dakar and places like this, I've kind of been able to open it up a bit so that I'm not just speaking about that, but that's definitely in there. So when you see the characters with the scarification lines on their body, that's me talking about the Yoruba history and these characters because you don't have if you go to the Met, you see all the Greco-Roman like full forms, like full Herculean statues, figures, like full body characters, right? And I always just felt like, why don't we have like full body characters? Why do we only have heads? Now, you know, I'm sure there were at the time, maybe they were destroyed, something like that. But what all that we have that has survived are the heads. So I just really wanted to think about what the full bodies would look like in a Greco-Roman style, I guess you could say, especially with some of the kind of musculature and how I'm thinking about the forms here in this instance. Yeah, I'm trying to kind of bridge that gap, kind of put those two histories together for sure.
Is there a gender to the forms, or are they sort of not meant to represent any specific gender? Or yeah, I'm just kind of curious because in some cases it seems like, oh, that's a very feminine form or that's a very masculine
hmm
form, but I'm not exactly sure if
hmm
I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah, you are. It's a combination of both. I'm really, really drawn to all aspects of the anatomy, the human anatomy. So I didn't want the characters to get too sort of singularly classified. You know, I'm dealing with nude bodies at the end of the day, and there's such an expansive history of painting nude bodies. So it's like there's a certain responsibility that comes with that, particularly as like a man doing this. So it's like I have been and will continue to be very conscious of that. Like, what am I trying to say? What am I trying to put out into the world? So yeah, these are androgynous bodies. They kind of carry a bit of both. Um, because I'm interested in the flow, the form, the shape of the body, not necessarily the specificity of gender. Like they are sensual, they are kind of alluring and powerful and sort of dominant, but I don't really want the kind of specifics of certain features and gender describing features to suddenly take over what's happening and take over the kind of story. I'm much more interested in the overall feel of these kind of large orange or red or blue bodies in this environment. And I think that it enables it to be even more kind of, as you were saying before, like speaking to a magical space where you don't have to consider kind of the grounding reality of them. Like sometimes they have belly buttons, sometimes they don't. For example, it's like there are certain things where you're just starting to think maybe maybe you recognize that aspect, maybe you don't. And I like the spiritual kind of aspect that's able to speak to because there's an openness to it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We're coming toward the end now. We did have a question come in from one of our viewers, and the question is, what's your advice to a young artist that's struggling to stay connected to their community? And now, obviously, I don't have more context for this question, but
Mm,
I will just have to
mm,
assume what they're talking about is being a young artist trying to stay connected to their artist community. Is it
mm,
is it just a matter of
mm,
going out to the openings? Is it a matter of connecting
mm.
art, bringing artists to your studio? Is there any thoughts you have around that?
Yeah, I'm really struck by that question because I can feel the realness of it, you know? I can really feel how significant that intent is. I can feel the intention behind it. Because moving here, moving to this country, leaving the UK, what's kept me afloat is my community, right? But I got that from my graduate program, my MFA studies. These are still the people that I'm with to this day. I would say, as you suggested, absolutely going to openings, but you know, things like if you're close to film screenings at institutions and things like this, film screenings, musical performances, like concerts, shows, maybe not even specifically the traditional fine art like spaces, but spaces where you think that there will be other people that are like-minded, that you can connect with. I'd say music for sure. Like if there's like some sort of like casual spaces where people are performing live music venues and things like this that are a good way to kind of connect with community, I think. It's a hard moment for that for a myriad of reasons. Like the world is gearing us to not see the need for physical community, like increasingly, you know, like as a student or as a young artist, it's like it's not it's not made easy. It's made harder
Right.
than it's ever been. So I really kind of feel that question. I appreciate that question. You know, thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you for asking. I would recommend go to institutional art, museum gallery spaces, live music spaces, things like that. try and connect with people like broadly across different mediums too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's good.
Hmm.
Obviously, it's like taking the initiative and also being open. I
Hmm.
mean, just to like add on to what you said, I think that half the work of being connected to the community or any community is actually being receptive to others, right?
Mm.
Half the
Mm.
work
You
is,
have to be open.
you may want people to come to your studio, but also half the work is visiting other people too. Like, so you have like, it's
Absolutely.
reciprocal. Right? I think the reciprocation
Absolutely.
is really a big part of that. Down to the final couple of minutes, someone asked, I guess this is a question about whether there are editions. Like, do you do prints? Are there any other ways of interacting or collecting your work that's other than purchasing a painting? Is there, I don't know, is there any other means to do that?
Yes, absolutely. I have prints, some etchings. I've really enjoyed printmaking. I've done a lithograph, a series of lithographs, and some etchings and some monotypes. Printmaking has been a really, I mean, we didn't have time. We could have had a whole separate kind of 40-minute conversation about how printmaking has had like a profound impact on my practice. As you know, like Frank Bowling, like printmaking was huge for him in that space too. It's like a great medium and has pushed me really far forward. Yeah, I have prints available with my gallery White Cube, or um, yeah, they're out there. Let me see, where are the prints? Um, yeah, with my gallery, I have some prints.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, White Cube. Well,
yeah.
we've come to the end here. I really appreciate your time and your generosity. It's been really great talking to you. This was actually one of the first times we've had such an in-depth conversation, so it's been wonderful for me too. I
Hmm.
wanted to kind of
Hmm.
keep it natural, and
Hmm.
it's been really fun. So,
Hmm.
um, what's your next exhibition that you're working on?
That would be, I was going to say your show that we're doing, but actually, no, there's another one. There's one in Seoul in January that I'm doing with White Cube. Um, but in New York, yeah, I will be taking part in your group exhibition soon.
In March, absolutely.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Tunji. I'm going to say our final words now. Wish you a really great evening, and thank you everyone for joining us today. The Gantt Center's goal is always to provide programs that inform and inspire. The support of viewers like you allows the Gantt Center to expand its reach and further develop programs like Open Air. You can lend your support to the Gantt Center by texting "Give to Gantt" to the number 91999. Also, be sure to like and subscribe this channel for future programs and other video content updates. Thank you again for joining us for this conversation, and we look forward to next month's Open Air with artist Itasha Womack. Have a wonderful and safe evening and happy holidays. Bye bye.